Okay, good afternoon everyone. Imbag nga aldaw kanya yung amin. My name is Kennedy Jetajobe and I'm from the section B and I will be tackling about the module 12, writing for radio under topic 12.2 principles of clear and effective writing for radio. Okay, so first of all, let me start you with a question. How is listening to radio different from reading a newspaper or watching television? Well, radio is somehow purely auditory. As Vincent McLerney noted in his seminal work on radio writing, radio requires language or the usage of words and the mouth that is designed to be heard and not to be read by McLerney 2001. This isn't just a technical dis this isn't just a technical distinction. However, it fundamentally changed how we must create every sentence, every word in the art of a radio broadcaster. But here's the critical part. In radio, you only get one shot because it is a one-way process only. Once it was heard by the audience, you cannot turn back time to recap it unless it is recorded by the audience itself. There's no going back, no rereading, no visual cues to help clarify meaning. As Greg Dobbs said in his comprehensive guide to broadcast writing, the radio content must make sense the first time it hits the audience listeners because listeners cannot reread the copy itself. When writing for radio, the primary focus should be on crafting language that is heard rather than read. Since radio journalism depends on spoken delivery, the script must be conversational, fluid, and easy to be followed. Using short and clear sentences and dialogues helps maintain the listener's attention while avoiding complex structures and ensures that the story or a segment remains engaging and comprehensible. Equally important, we must highlight the core characteristics of a radio segment because radio writing has fundamental characteristics that we need to highlight that distinguish it from all other forms of communication. Number one, it's conversational tone. Radio writing should sound like you're talking to a friend over a cup of coffee, not delivering a formal lecture such as supported by Macklish and Link, that emphasizes that effective radio writing mirrors natural speech patterns. Second, it's clarity and simplicity. Every sentence must be instantly comprehensible, no complex clauses, no buried leads, and no abstract concepts without any explanation. Number three, it's a mental image. Because since listeners can see what you're discussing and it's purely audible, you become their eyes, your words, and you must create vivid pictures in their minds by the usage of descriptive words. Number four, it's brevity. Short sentences aren't just easy to understand. They're easier to speak naturally and follow when listening. It is beneficial on both the listener and also to the radio broadcaster because we need to emphasize that time is a very crucial element in writing a radio script. And number five, it's audio integration. Your words doesn't exist in isolation. They work with music, background effects, sound effects, and ambient audio to create a complete experience, such as in the creation of radio dramas and various segments, in order for you to help the audience imagine what you are talking about. Okay, okay. Now let's move on to the radio writer itself. The radio writer is somehow we could classify him as a storyteller. Think of radio writers as audio cinematographers, just like a film director that uses camera angles and lighting to tell a story visually. Radio writers, broadcasters, uses words, rhythm, and sound to create scenes in the listener's imagination. This brings us to our first major principle. However, we must first define what a principle is. So, according to my PowerPoint, a principle is a moral rule or belief that helps you know what is right and wrong that influences your actions. So, a principle in a basic terms, it's a basic rule, belief, or standard that guides us how people should act, learn, or perform their duties. It serves as a foundation for good behavior, for order, effective learning, and professional conduct, especially radio broadcasters and producers, and even those under the radio industry are so-called professionals. So they must abide with the radio rules and regulations such as KBP, Kabisanan ng mga Broadcasters ng mga Pilipinas. So we are going on now to the first principle. It's principle number 5. It's the use of descriptive words. But what does this really mean in practice? McLerney defines descriptive words in radio as a specific nouns, active verbs, and selective modifiers that deliver sensory detail rather than abstract summary. In other words, you're not just reporting, but you're creating an experience based on the story that you want to tell. Because descriptive language that engages multiple senses, such as the usage of five senses, the sight, sound, and even implied motion and urgency, gives a vivid description or imagination towards the audiences. So, here's why this works. Our brains are wired to process sensory information. When you use descriptive language, you're activating the same neural pathways that will fire the listeners. We're actually listening the event itself. You're creating what psychologists call embodied cognition, and the listener's brain responds as if they're physically present. So I'm just gonna give you an example from Cara David. So I highlighted this part because this is from Carlos David's tutorials from storytelling from about pag-ahon sa kahirapan. Kung dati, dagat ang kanilang tahanan, ngayon, dagat na ng kahirapan ang kanilang nilulunuran. Pero handa silang sisiri ng lahat, maiahon lang ang dignidad ng kanilang tribo. So, overall, the usage of what we call descriptive words highlights that during script writing, Stewart and Alexander emphasizing using precise nouns and active verbs in narration in order for you to create immediate and sound images. Don't write something that is very vague and very straightforward because you are not there to tell us you are not there to present an idea but to tell a story that is worth listening for. Number 2, it's sound design coordination. So your descriptive language should work with not against your audio elements. If you're describing something, then you should always use what we call the usage of sound effects and even vivid sound imagery for you to describe a certain scenario. And number 3, it's economic principle. So prefer one well-chosen descriptor to several general adjectives. So don't say like this, the big, tall, huge building, but say the towering office complex or the massive warehouse in order for you to exaggerate or even describe it in a form of exaggerated or an imagery that could give the audience an imaginary experience. Now, we're down to our last principle, tie with audience experiences. So this brings us the recognition that a fundamental truth about human communication, people care most about information they can relate to their own lives. So in just like in news writing, the element of prominence and relevancy, you must make sure that your targeted audiences know the information well that you are telling with. So I'm just gonna give you an example when it comes to news writing. So when you are writing for about something, if you're from Luzon and you know if someone writes the death of a certain individual from Mindanao, then how can it be connected with the experience from Luzon unless if it's a prominent person or its concerns with the national issues in the Philippines. So every radio story must pass what I call the so what test. Your listeners is asking consciously or unconsciously, why should I care about this? How does this affect me as a person or as a citizen? So Macklish and Link note that successful radio content must answer the listener's implicit question, ano nga ba ang ambag nito para sa aking buhay? If you can't answer that question, then you've lost the interest of your audiences. But here's what research tells us about that. Information connected to personal experience creates stronger memory pathways and emotional response. When you tie abstract information to familiar experiences, you're not just making it easier to understand, but you're making it more likely to be remembered and acted upon. To effectively tie the content to audience experience, you need to understand your audience deeply. So we need to highlight that aside from the general public, we must highlight the audience segmentation or sino nga ba ang target audience ko. Number one, it's you must know the demographics such as the age, income, educational level, family status. And when connecting with audience experience, language choice becomes important. So vocabulary matching, the use of everyday language that reflects your audience speech patterns. As highlighted by Popper 1990, um, he emphasized that alienating jargons can distract the interest of the audiences. Number two, it's cultural sensitivity. So when we talk about cultural sensitivity, choose references that resonate across diverse audiences, segments without excluding anyone. And number three, it's cultural sensitivity. Since we are localizing it, choose references that resonate across diverse audience segments without excluding anyone. At the same time, general awareness, it's balancing your reference that appeal to different age groups within your target demographics because in listening in the radio, you are catering to mass audiences. So, here's how to build audience connection into your story structure. In writing a lead, you must start with a concrete, relatable image or individual experiences, and the bridge should clearly establish why the story matters to listeners. So, the closing must have an appropriate provide specific actions or a call to action that can take these principles into a real life action because they work together to create a compelling radio content and the usage of descriptive language helps you to connect with your audiences. And based on the research and professional practice, some mistakes occurred in writing a radio, such as the over-description. So don't let descriptive language overwhelm the core message. So it can reach to false connections because you must not force audience connections that feel artificial. And number three, it's do not use jargons because when we define jargons, there are some terminologies that cannot be understood by mere common people because these are languages that are spoken by some experts. And cultural assumptions don't assume shared cultural references. So to sum it up, radio writing is fundamentally different because it is designed for the ear and not the eye. And descriptive language creates mental images because your listeners listens and imagines the scenario that you are talking about. And audience connection makes content memorable. Always answer why should I care? Number four, its integration is the key because these principles work together, not separately. And practice makes perfect because, like any skill, radio writing improves with deliberate practice. Okay. These principles aren't just about radio anymore. In the age of digital era, audio content exploding across different platforms. These skills are more important than ever. Whether you're creating traditional radio content, podcasts, audiobooks, or even voiceover work, these principles of radio creation or radio writing will serve us well in order for us to provide not just quality but ethically abiding outputs for the betterment of our community. And that will be all for my presentation. And to end my presentation, all of my fellow listeners should answer the questions. In writing radio writing, what marks the thin line between descriptive and being flowery, and how can crossing that line affect listener clarity? And number two, how does understanding audience segmentation promotes principle number six, tying with audiences' experiences? And I hope that you've listened well and hoping for your favorable response in answering my questions. That will be all and thank you very much for listening to my read to my presentation.